Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of cinema, your pharaoh of physical media, your archbishop of Banterbury, and your chancellor of cheerfulness. And lest we not forget, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am, yes, Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, you imagination connoisseurs that I cherish. So, welcome. This is Robservations episode number 487. My God, less than 2 weeks away from the 500th episode. I can't believe we're there. But you know what's going to happen before the 500th episode of Robservations? That's right. The third Mainframe Comic-Con. It's happening this weekend. The Mainframe Virtual Comic-Con, and I will be interviewing people like Robert Wool, believe it or not. Yes, Robert Wool. I'm going to be interviewing the legendary Howard Chaykin, one of my heroes, the man who created American Flag, the man who renovated The Shadow and Black Hawk for DC. I can't, the United States of Hysteria, I can't tell you how excited I am to talk to Howard Chaykin, and it's amazing. But you know who else I'm going to talk to? Let me tell you who else I'm going to talk to. I am very excited to interview Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa. Now, come on. One of my favorite character actors. He always classes up the joint. He's had a long time career. I mean, he even played a bailiff in the Star Trek The Next Generation pilot Encounter at Farpoint in Q's Kangaroo Court. I mean, this man has done everything. I will be interviewing him at this week's Mainframe Comic-Con, running all weekend. Check it out. I mean, it's a great event. I've had a blast. It's 30-minute panels, so they're so quick. They're like almost like bite-sized panels. You go in and you do them, and it feels like I just start talking to somebody, and then it's over. But it's an incredibly well-produced event. It's for a great cause, and they've really expanded it this time. And this is the third one, and they keep inviting me back. And I have to say, thank you, because I love doing it. It's so much fun, and I never know who I'm going to talk to, and it's a blast. And everybody who's there, because it's you're in and out so quickly, everybody's having a good time. So that's how often can you say that these days? So check out the Mainframe Comic-Con. Now, even I don't understand. They've got like virtual pavilions you can go into now. I mean, they've really kicked it into high gear. So, wow, I think that's it's going to be terrific. By the way, can I just say that one of the great joys of this channel is getting letters from you all, and everyone knows that I love getting letters from our own Willow Yang. Her letter today. I have a letter from her today. Of all the letters she sent me, it made me really laugh out loud. And I'm going to read it to you, but I have to play parts. And I got to say right up front, I always get nervous when I have to read the part of Willow Yang's mom, because I want to convey what I hear to be her personality, but not be offensive. So I have to say, her letter today was a classic. I'm going to say that before I even read it. Not to build it up too much, but it's pretty damn funny. And I think you'll see why soon. So, as you know, scouring for information, I came across a Variety story, and I'm like, wait, what? One of the movies that I've been most interested in seeing for the last 3 decades of my life, since it was announced back in 1981, is the New Mutants adaptation. And, well, I'm just kidding. It's only been 3 years. What has it been? Who knows? A girl gets older as she waits for her movie to come out. I think that, the New Mutants, as everyone knows, one of my favorite things in the world is Moon Knight. Moon Knight, as written by Doug Mensch and drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz. It was the comic book that got me into reading comic books when there was a direct sale market back in the early 80s, which also, by the way, led me to Howard Chaykin's American Flag, which also blew my mind. It was one of the reasons I started collecting comics again as a young teenager. And when Bill Sienkiewicz left Moon Knight, it was really interesting to watch his evolution from, a lot of people said he was aping Neil Adams, and he even talks about that. And then over the course of the 30 issues of Moon Knight that he drew, his style really started to evolve. And I loved watching that evolution. And by the time he got to New Mutants, it was established. And a lot of people didn't like it, which he told me. I didn't realize that. But by the time he got to New Mutants, I mean, would Warlock have ever been created as a character if it wasn't for Bill Sienkiewicz? I don't know. But great stuff. And his first storyline was the famous Demon Bear storyline, which, again, I loved. I thought it was some of Chris Claremont's, some of the coolest writing he'd done up to that point on the X-Men, and then looking at Sienkiewicz's work alongside Chris Claremont's script, it was really exciting. So when Josh Boone took over New Mutants, and when he directed it, and they decided to adapt the Demon Bear storyline, for me personally, because I had such a strong connection to the X-Men growing up, the characters, and we're talking in the 80s, I was very, very excited. So the delay of this film has been disheartening, to say the least. And so I am very excited to see it. Well, it's been pulled off the release schedule how many times? Like, who knows? But this Variety story that I came across, I was like, oh, Mulan goes direct to video in this country. I figured, well, where's New Mutants going to go? It just didn't occur to me. I just assumed maybe that was pulled and I hadn't heard it. Indeed, it was not. And here's a story in Variety that let me put on my glasses. That look, I understand these disposable glasses that we have. Perhaps these aren't the best for my face. I get it. These reading glasses, they're not my favorite. Okay, I'd rather have Tom Ford rims, but I don't. So here's an article that was published today at noon. It was published little over an hour ago. New Mutants is apparently still being released in theaters in 2 weeks. Against all odds, the New Mutants, Disney and Fox's beleaguered superhero thriller that's been delayed numerous times in the past 2 years, might end up being the film that revives moviegoing, which would be irony of ironies. Though Disney has shuffled around theatrical plans for nearly every movie slated for release in 2020 and beyond, The New Mutants has curiously stayed put on the weekend of August 28th. Many previously expected it could be postponed again, while others speculated that the film might be exported to Disney Plus or Hulu. But Disney sent exhibitors a lengthy email on Monday outlining theatrical plans, including news that tickets can be sold starting the morning of August 18th. I guess that would be a week from today or tomorrow. It's for sure opening August 28th, one exhibitor wrote to Variety excitedly. Now, I have to tell you, I find this delightful and totally amusing that New Mutants, I mean, what Christopher Nolan wanted to do with Tenet was going to bring people back to the theater, that New Mutants is going to be that very thing. Now, as this article goes on to tell us, we don't exactly have a lot of movie theaters open, and there won't be any movie theaters open in Los Angeles and New York. But hey, which I can't believe that I've lived in LA for 32 years. And when I first moved here, I was going to USC, but I moved into Westwood, which is UCLA territory, because I wanted to be close to the movie theaters there. A lot of the movie theaters I loved, like the National, no longer exist. But it's ironic that the New Mutants, based on the Demon Bear storyline, something that I've loved for, again, over 35 years, I might have to drive across state lines if I want to see it in the theater, which is probably very slim, because why would I do that? I mean, I would do that, but I just don't have the time. And I don't know if I could convince Elizabeth, like, hey, honey, let's drive across state lines to see New Mutants, which is a 90-minute movie. She's going to be like, wrong guess, Hans. Would you care to go for Double Jeopardy where the scores can really change? Yeah, so I don't think that we'll be doing that. But New Mutants is opening for sure on the 28th, one exhibitor wrote to Variety excitedly. Theoretically, given the fast-changing nature of the pandemic, it's still possible that Disney could amend those plans. But for now, The New Mutants will be the first new theatrical release from a major studio since the pandemic forced U.S. cinemas to close in March. The news is especially surprising, and not just because Disney has done minimal promotion for the New Mutants. Over the last few months, Christopher Nolan's sci-fi epic Tenet and Disney's Mulan have received the lion's share of attention, with exhibitors and studios alike hoping those two titles could help reignite cinemas after prolonged shutdowns. Now, Mulan is skipping U.S. theaters and premiering on Disney+, while Tenet is staggering its rollout, starting internationally on August 26th, before making its way to select U.S. cities on September 3rd. I can't imagine that, like, my whole life, well, basically the last 40 years of my life, I think that the first time I really started to be aware of the summer movie season as a season was when I was 13 and Empire Strikes Back opened in 1980. And I'm like, okay. And that's when I started really anticipating summer movies. And I really started following. It was also the year when, right before Empire Strikes Back came out, I got my first VCR. And when I was 13 years old, for me, I was already a dyed-in-the-wool movie fan, but when I was 13 was when I got serious about it, because I could study movies. Now I could time shift films that aired late at night. I would scour the TV Guide. By the way, kids, the TV Guide was a thing that my mother used to pick up. It was a digest-sized magazine that had every TV show. And back when we only had 3 networks, an independent station, and PBS, actually 2 independent stations, you know, it was possible. We had 6 channels in Seattle, where I grew up, that you could scour the TV Guide. And when I had a VCR, everything, you'd look at every late night thing. And when there were movies on, I was able to time shift films that obviously I couldn't stay up and see on a school night. And it was very exciting. And so that's when I really got into studying movies and watching the summer movie season. So for 40 years, man, the summer movie season was really important to me. And this summer, I mean, I haven't been into a movie theater since March. This has never happened. I mean, in my entire adult life. And there was a lot of movies to anticipate. I mean, Justice for Han. Come on, Noonien sing. What do I always have on the brain? Sun Kang and his character Han Solo from the Fast and Furious franchise. I mean, finally, Justice for Han will be served. And oh no, it was shuffled into 2021. No Time to Die. I had great tickets to see it at the Cinerama Dome opening night. My favorite seat. Gone. No. Tenet. Dying to see that. Now it's not even going to open in Los Angeles. I mean, this might be the only movie that comes out in the summer, because technically the Labor Day weekend, I guess that's the end of summer. But this is like the first summer in 40 years, man. That, I know, you know, first world problems. I get it. But still, I just want to go to a movie, man. I just want to see, please let this open. And please, maybe I can drive to Cerritos, you know, namesake of the new starship on Star Trek Lower Decks. This weird idea that any Starfleet ship is somehow secondary or lesser than any other Starfleet ship. I just don't understand the premise that Starfleet crews that go on a second contact mission. I mean, wouldn't that be even more important than first contact, because they're the ones that have to deal with a new... Anyway, what am I talking about? New Mutants. That's right, New Mutants. So, New Mutants coming out. It's still very exciting. Even before coronavirus caused cinemas to shutter and required studios to postpone major movies, the New Mutants endured an especially arduous journey to the big screen, since it was initially slated to open in 2018 under 20th Century Fox. The film reportedly went through extensive reshoots, and its release date has changed 5 times. It was never reshot. Variety, shame on you. Shame on you. It was never reshot. There was no reshoots done. And its release date has changed 5 times. In a recent CinemaCon at Home panel, the studio cheekily addressed the New Mutants' numerous big-screen delays, even putting an asterisk next to the latest trailer and writing, "Fingers crossed," next to the late August date. It's unclear where in the U.S. the New Mutants will be able to play. Currently, 1,309 of the 6,021 venues in the country have reopened. That's not even 20%. According to ComScore, movie theaters in New York City and Los Angeles, the 2 biggest movie-going markets in the States, are still closed without a set date to reopen. There's been speculation that Disney was contractually obligated to release the New Mutants in theaters after inheriting the movie as part of its $71.3 billion merger with Fox, which might explain why the studio opted to forge ahead with this release date while deferring titles, including the family adventure Jungle Cruise and Marvel's Black Widow. In any case, the release of New Mutants comes at a dire time for movie theater owners. Exhibitors that have started to resume business are finding that ticket sales aren't flowing as freely as they were before the pandemic. Yes, because every public gathering now, people come back and they test positive for coronavirus. That's partially because there hasn't been a new movie to show in theaters in months. Though people might be desperate to get out of the house, they're less inclined to go see Harry Potter or Star Wars for the umpteenth time. Studios are still grappling with the fact that there's no telling how willing people will be to go back to the movies, making it riskier to debut tentpoles with massive budgets. Instead, many Hollywood companies have opted to scrap theatrical plans for movies like Paramount's SpongeBob, Sponge on the Run, Universal's Trolls World Tour, and Warner Brothers' Scoob, in favor of having them premiere on digital rental platforms or through streaming services. Though exhibitors realize it's a necessary move for studios during uncertain times, it's been a major source of frustration for theater owners who have been left without anything to entice audiences. Directed by Josh Boone, The New Mutants features an ensemble cast including Maisie Williams, Anna Taylor-Joy, who I love, she's amazing, and newcomer Blue Hunt as young mutants trapped in a secret facility against their will. The movie is expected to be the final entry in the X-Men franchise, the 13-film series that stretched from 2000's X-Men to 2019's Dark Phoenix. For the most part, the superhero adaptations have enjoyed lucrative ticket sales and even an Oscar nomination in the case of 2017's Logan. But Dark Phoenix, which was originally intended to wrap up the X-Men universe before New Mutants was pushed into 2020, bombed and the studio lost over $100 million, indicating that after 2 decades, the franchise is running on fumes. However, there's hope that Kevin Feige, the mastermind behind Marvel Cinematic Universe, can revive an aging franchise now the characters have a new home at the Magic Kingdom, and that could be a heroic ending everyone can root for. Well, I can't argue with that. I am very excited that this movie's coming out because I really want to see it. And so I must say, though, I mean, obviously, because of contracts, remember what I always say, kids, it's not show friends, it's show business, and you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I am sure that part of the negotiations and the cast and the crew and the filmmakers, this movie was guaranteed a theatrical burst, a theatrical release. But I was thinking that, you know, it's interesting that on Disney Plus, this would have been a far less riskier film to lead their SVOD, if you're going to, or PVOD, paid video on demand, whatever you want to call it. This might have been a better choice than Mulan and less risky. I mean, it would have, obviously, the movie couldn't have opened at all, but if this were given, say, a 2-week theatrical run, and with only 1,300 theaters open, there's only so much box office this film can do. So it's like kind of when you get a, like if you're making a film, whether it's mostly direct-to-video or whether it's an indie film and you're guaranteed in your contract a week-long theatrical release, what happens is, and that happens a lot with low-budget indie films, they'll put the theater out, or they'll put the movie out in theaters for a week with not much of an advertising budget, so they fulfill their obligation, but there's not even an attempt because they're not going to spend any marketing dollars on it, so no one knows it's playing in the theaters. So they just put it out at minimal expense, and they can say it's been in theaters. And that's kind of what they're doing with New Mutants, which in a way is sort of sad. But if that were the case, because they're obligated to put it out theatrically, I mean, why not just put it out for a week, you know, in drive-ins, make a big deal of it, make as much money as they can. But if they were to have led, if Disney Plus led with this film, and maybe they're not doing that because of the content, it's scary, it's not necessarily something they want on Disney Plus, but they have a few X-Men movies on Disney Plus now, and I find it fascinating that they didn't opt to do that with this movie, because this is the kind of movie that people would actually pay for. X-Men fans would pay for, not that people won't pay for Mulan, but I think that there is a built-in audience here that definitely would have opted to pay $20, a rental fee for this. I know I would. And I know that I'm not even sure that I'll be able to go to the theater and see this movie anywhere, which really would bum me out because I am definitely looking forward to this movie. So anyway, congratulations to everybody who worked on this film. It's been a long time coming. I hope it's a wonderful movie. I know it's got very talented actors in it, and I'm a fan of the director, who, by the way, check it out. I mean, this poor guy, Josh Boone, who directed New Mutants. You know what his next project is? It's an adaptation of Stephen King's The Stand about a global pandemic that wipes out humanity. He's batting 1,000. I can't wait to see The Stand. I mean, it's going to make me go back to CBS All Access. I mean, I might keep it after the new seasons of Star Trek Discovery, or what is it, and Star Trek Lower Decks. I know, 23 weeks of Star Trek. I get it. But if The Stand debuts, I can't wait. That's the one thing that maybe won't be disappointing on CBS All Access, so that'll be fun. Yeah. So can you imagine you make New Mutants, it gets kicked down the road for 2 years, finally comes out during a global pandemic, and there's only 1,300 theaters open in America? What a bummer. Yeah, wow. Anyway, let's see. I got letters, and you know what? I'm just going to start out. I'm going to start out because I love this letter so much. This letter comes from the lovely, the talented, the smart, our own PhD candidate, cute as a button, Willow Yang, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, now with the revamped website, you can go read all of Willow's old letters at Willow Talk on the Burnettwork.net website. So go check it out. Write Willow letters. So, take it away, Willow. Greetings, Rob. During my recent movie watching with my mom, I tried showing her a couple of films featuring extraterrestrials. We started out with E.T. We only got half an hour in before my mom refused to watch anymore. Mom: the alien looks just like a human. It has a head, hands, and feet. Me: I know. Most aliens in movies look like humans. This is nonsense. Aliens shouldn't look like humans. They might look like a cloud of air. I know. I also think it's dumb that people always imagine aliens to look like humans. This movie is nonsense. Aliens should be smart. If they can come to Earth, then they must be smarter than us. The alien in this movie is too stupid. It's not stupid. It's a scientist. It looks like a lingzai, a type of mushroom used in traditional Chinese medicine. How does it look like a lingzai? It's got a large head and a long, thin neck. It's even about the same color. You said it looks too much like a human. It does look too much like a human. Well, if it looks like a human, then it can't look like a lingzai. I don't like this movie. The alien is too stupid. I want to watch something else. Seeing that she didn't like E.T., I decided to show her Arrival, which was also on Netflix. We managed to get through the entire movie, even though my mom didn't particularly enjoy it. Why would China try and destroy the alien ships? If the aliens can come to our planet, they must be more advanced than us. We should immediately surrender to them. Yes, but people aren't going to surrender right away. They're going to try fighting first. The aliens will destroy us. It's like hitting a rock with a chicken egg. But the aliens in the movie are good aliens. Those aliens are stupid. They look like cuttlefish, and they sound like elephants. People can only imagine aliens that look like things on this planet. Aliens shouldn't look like anything from Earth. They might be a beam of light. I know, but most movies make them look like humans or animals. This is nonsense. People are just making things up. Well, of course they're making things up. We haven't met any real aliens, and nobody knows what they look like. I hope aliens never come here. What if they like eating humans? What if we become their favorite food? Maybe they don't need to eat. You just said aliens shouldn't look like anything from Earth. Well, what if they enslave us? Well, if they have advanced technology, they'd build robots to do their work. They wouldn't need us. What if they want to keep us as pets? It's not fun keeping a robot as a pet. But maybe they're good aliens. But what if they aren't good aliens? What if they want to conquer the planet? Whenever humans go to a new place, they start killing the natives. Well, that's what a lot of alien movies are about. The aliens come and try and conquer the Earth, and humans have to fight them. That's stupid. We can't travel to other planets. If the aliens can come to us, then they must be much smarter than us. We're probably like ants to them. We should immediately surrender. Yes, I agree. That's why I like this movie. I think it's more realistic. I don't like this movie. The characters are too dumb. Why did the woman have the child even though she knew the child was going to die? Well, maybe she can only see the future but not change it. Then the aliens gave her a bad gift. If she didn't know the future, at least she'd be able to enjoy the years she had with her child. Now, she's going to spend all that time knowing that her child's going to die. It isn't just about her. The aliens need humans to help them 3,000 years later. I don't like movies about aliens. It's all nonsense. I want to watch real stuff. To give a brief summary of the movies that we've watched, my mom couldn't finish E.T. and didn't like Arrival. She also didn't like A Quiet Place, Toy Story 2, Inside Out, or Unforgiven, and was lukewarm on My Neighbor Totoro. She thought the lions in both the original and the remake of Lion King were too ugly, and they should have made a movie about pandas instead. She did enjoy the first two of the rebooted Planet of the Apes movies. She also liked One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and $1 Million Baby, but found the endings to be too dour. She really liked Up, There Will Be Blood, and Hacksaw Ridge. Go, Mom! I've returned back to work now, so I'm unable to continue on our movie-watching journey together, but I'm glad for the time that I did get to spend with my mom during the lockdown. Best regards, Willow. Well, Willow, no one is more grateful for the time you got to spend with your mom more than I am, because there's nothing I like more than getting letters from you about what you and your mom watch and the journey through cinema that you take together. And I hope against hope, if your mother ever sees this or you ever tell her, I hope she's not offended by my impression of her. Having never really had a conversation with her, I can't do it. I just extrapolated upon what I would imagine a conversation with your mom would be like. But I thank you for that. Let's see. Oh, this is a whining about movies letter. Actually, I've got 3 whining about movies letters. That's crazy. Crazy. Let me go back, and there's letters that I've missed. So, this letter comes from Kyle Arking. Dear RMB, your discussion of Star Trek yesterday had me thinking. Why can't Star Trek follow the same model as the Planet of the Apes franchise? Both are based on 60s properties, yet Star Trek has divided its fans, and Planet of the Apes is still as beloved today, with some of the best prequels to any franchise ever. I love both Star Wars and Star Trek. However, when I was little, I never watched Star Trek. I remember seeing the Next Generation Playmates toys in comic book shops, and they didn't attract someone who was interested in Jedi or Spider-Man. I was 10 when Star Trek '09 was released, and from that day on, I became a fan. To me, the stuff that worked was the chemistry of the cast, the excellent score by Michael Giacchino, and the story. I wasn't a fan of Star Trek prior, so I had no idea what Spock was supposed to act like. The Spock I saw in the film became my Spock. Funnily enough, I bought the Playmates toys for that movie, and boy, was the transporter room playset fun. Sadly, those Star Trek toys didn't get the amount of play as did the G.I. Joe and Avatar figures I got later that year. I thought Star Trek '09 was a cool movie, but when I went back to watch the original movie, I was bored and confused out of my mind. Luckily, The Wrath of Khan kept me more entertained into watching more of the films. I think that a huge factor when it comes to rebooting a franchise is to get the new fans to be able to go back and enjoy the old movies. A fan of new Star Trek would be hard-pressed to enjoy the original Star Trek films because of how different they are. That brings me to Planet of the Apes. I've always loved this franchise. In fact, one of my earliest memories was seeing a commercial of the Tim Burton version as a baby. I had a bunch of the toys when I was little and always thought Michael Clark Duncan's Atar action figure was freaking awesome. When Rise of the Planet of the Apes came out, I was so excited. I love the film. but walked out disappointed because I wanted the film to show all the apes talk and take over the world. But the sequels, Dawn and War, helped fix that disappointment. I will maintain that War for the Planet of the Apes is one of the best science fiction films of the decade and is very underrated. There's barely any dialogue for the majority of the film, and it conveys more emotion than I ever thought was possible. It was then I was able to go back and enjoy all of the Apes films, and the core DNA of the franchise was easily recognizable to me. Today, it is very hard to keep a franchise alive. Every franchise is a product of the times. Star Trek sadly has no cool video game like Battlefront to pump up the fan base, or a show like The Mandalorian that has even your grandma talking about Baby Yoda. Discovery is the new Star Trek, and I don't know a single person that watches it. Is it because it's on a streaming service that has been around 3 years and only has a couple of original shows? I agree with you, Rob. Star Trek needs a new team behind it. I like Kurtzman, but it's time for someone new. Another thing that the Apes franchise did right is that it focused itself around new characters. Yes, Caesar and Cornelius and Nova were in it, but they weren't the same characters as much as they were fun nods to the past films with a twist. Hopefully, Star Trek finds its way. If Creed can revive the Rocky franchise, then anything is possible. Thanks for reading, and have a great day. That letter comes from Kyle Arking. Kyle, thank you very much for that letter. What a great letter. You know, I do want to point out that I often forget that as much as I am disdainful of the last 11 years of the Star Trek franchise, it's letters like yours. There is a whole generation of people that Star Trek '09 is their first experience with Star Trek, and it leads them back into the franchise, and I think that's terrific. Unfortunately, I hear you. I can't imagine watching Star Trek '09 and then trying to watch Star Trek the Motion Picture. That would be just bewildering. What I would hope is that you'd go back and watch the original series from the beginning. And it's interesting. Elizabeth just watched all of the original series. She went through all 79 episodes of the original series. And it was interesting gauging her reactions. A lot of the obvious episodes she loved, but she liked things that I didn't like very much. And that was fascinating to watch. But it was apparent to her, I mean, she'd watched Star Trek before, but how good the show actually is and how it holds up. And it's still relevant today, which is great. And I mean, I agree with you. I think, look, I grew up a dyed-in-the-wool Planet of the Apes fan. I love the original Planet of the Apes movies. I was really disappointed by the Tim Burton reboot. But I loved Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I loved it. And I loved all three of the movies. I didn't love War as much as you did, but War for the Planet of the Apes, that trilogy is astonishing. It's definitely one of the great movie trilogies. I mean, it's not held up there with Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings, but it is a very worthy trilogy and certainly an amazing reboot to the Planet of the Apes franchise. I loved it. I mean, I thought it was great. And like you pointed out, Ryan Coogler, and I've banged on about this since the movie came out. If you want to see how to revive a franchise or how to keep a long-running franchise going, in which case Creed was the 6th Rocky sequel. And it was made by Ryan Coogler, who is a huge fan of the franchise, and it was made with such love. And yet, it has a canonical fealty to the rest of the franchise. Ryan Coogler was able to write and direct Sylvester Stallone's performance to another Academy Award nomination, which is amazing. And the film felt new and fresh, and yet it still felt very much a part of the Rocky universe. And it might be the best film since the original, to be honest. And I think it's fantastic. Now, one of the things that I reported on this show a couple weeks back, and I did not get a copyright strike against me, was the Star Trek The Beginning screenplay that Eric Jedrinson wrote. Now, Eric Jedrinson was the supervising producer of Band of Brothers, and in 2005, the head of production of Paramount at the time, Donald DeLine and Kerry McCluggage, they had to beg Eric Jedrinson to come back. They not come back, but to come in and say, look, he had no interest in science fiction and no interest in Star Trek. He'd never even watched Star Trek. And they're like, we want, Band of Brothers was obviously one of the great things ever put on TV. So they begged him to come in. And what did Eric Jedrinson do? He went and watched all of Star Trek. He immersed himself in canonical Star Trek. And he wrote a script called Star Trek The Beginning. And what it was about was it took place after Enterprise, because Enterprise had just gone off the air. And the thing that because he keyed on this. The Romulan War, which is what Enterprise was leading up to, had never been detailed. It had been referenced in Balance of Terror, which is a first season original series episode. So because he was military-minded, he was like, okay. And he sort of combined Pearl Harbor and the Doolittle raid. I'm sure that was the kernel of the idea. And he told a new story that we had yet to see of all new characters. And he introduced young graduating cadets out of basically Starfleet, the Navy. And it was sort of quasi-military. And all of these new young cadets were great characters. And it's a wonderful script. Is the script perfect? Certainly not. It was only a first draft because after he turned it in, then Paramount, they changed regimes, and that script sort of was lost to the sands of time. But it's unfortunate because that's exactly the kind of script that needed to be used for Star Trek. And what was interesting, too, is as Jedrinson explains on the Inglorious Treksperts podcast, which you should check out, where we interviewed him, he talks about the first script was the Odyssey, the second script would be the Iliad, and then there would be a third part. So he was thinking in terms of a trilogy. And just being able to talk about things like reference the Odyssey in a Star Trek script, and that's kind of what they were doing. I mean, it's just a shame that it didn't get made. And the thing is, it could absolutely get made, but it needs to get made by someone like a Ryan Coogler, who has not only canonical fealty to Star Trek, because the Star Trek The Beginning script is just littered with nuggets of Star Trek canon. But if you had somebody that really was taking Star Trek from 1966 to 2005 and show, like, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to make an extension of that, rather than completely redesign the universe where there's no way you can explain that Star Trek Discovery has any connection to canonical Star Trek. It just doesn't work. Now, for people who are just starting to watch Star Trek with Discovery, it's like their first Star Trek show or whatever, I get it. I mean, I understand there's a lot to like. It's a lavishly produced show. It's very interesting. I just think that, as I've said before, it's very brain dead. The stories aren't good. And you might think they're good, and that's fine if they work for you, but I personally don't. And I would like to see the stories get better. But this script would have redefined Star Trek for a new generation. It would have given you new, exciting characters. I'm talking about the Star Trek The Beginning script now. The 2005 script that never got made. It could still get made today. It just needs to get made with a different team. And I think it's a Paramount script. And obviously now with Viacom coming back together, I think Paramount could then go off and make a Star Trek movie without Secret Hideout. They need to find a team of people that understand Star Trek, that really love Star Trek, and they need to find a director, and someone like Ryan Coogler, who's made, say, one really good independent movie, and then gets a shot at making a bigger screen debut, as Ryan Coogler did with that film. So, anyway, I want to thank you for writing in. That was a great letter. Guy Bottledorn writes in and says, "Hi, Rob. I'm not really into horror. I cannot call myself a connoisseur of the genre. But I do have some great horror titles in my collection. One of those movies that I can watch again and again is The Neon Demon, a masterpiece, in my eyes at least, by Nicholas Winding Refn. I'm sure you've already seen this one. I did. I went and saw it in the theater. I got a German 4K disc, and it looks and sounds awesome. Real demo material. The movie holds up literally. The movie holds a literal as well as a figurative mirror in front of the model business. The horror aspect is rather subdued, I must admit, but the end scenes have some great imagery that will stay with me for the rest of my life. As for the erotic side of it, the movie oozes sexuality out of virtually every scene, but always with a sense of beauty in mind. You are very right that it is a niche movie genre that deserves to be explored by every great director. Writing this letter, the opening scene of Enemy comes to mind. Besides the overt eroticism of the performance in the private club, there is also the bizarre use of the spider. However, the imagery of the spider will play a central role later on in the symbolism of the narrative of the whole movie. What a magnificent movie we would get from Denis Villeneuve if he would explore a combination of erotica and horror. The film world would be so much richer for it. Be hearing you, in your next 6 of 1 episode tomorrow. Guy Bottledorn. Well, Guy, thank you very much for this letter. I know it seems like it's time warp, but yeah, you know, I have to tell you, I did see the Neon Demon when it opened. I went with actually a group of guys, and I was a bit disappointed in it. It was maybe because I had already anticipated something like that. The idea of combining horror and modeling, or the modeling world and horror, was not new to me. And it seemed to be all building up to a cheeky ending. But I really enjoyed watching it. I was just disappointed. I didn't think it covered any new ground. But yeah, it has some great imagery. And Nicholas Winding Refn he's an interesting cat. Some of his stuff works for me, some of it doesn't. But now that I know there's a 4K German disc, I mean, those Germans knocking it out of the park. I got to call Dieter Bastian and say, bruh, what's up? Where's that 4K Neon Demon? I don't know. I mean, I didn't love that movie enough that I needed to go out and get that 4K version, but maybe I should watch it again. I reading your letter, I'm like, I need to watch this movie again. Like, why not? Anyway, I want to thank you for sending that in. And tomorrow, as you all know, Az and I, Heel versus Babyface, if you follow him, Az and I are doing our 4th episode of our look back at the Prisoner television series, and we are doing it in our own order. And tomorrow is the episode Free for All. So your homework, ladies and gentlemen, gentle beings, kind souls across 28 known galaxies, will be to watch that episode of The Prisoner and join us at noon tomorrow for the 4th episode of 6 of 1, our examination of the Prisoner TV series. So check that out. This one comes from Eric Gant. Greetings, O emissary of imaginative empowerment. The recent debut of Lower Decks has had a curious side effect. It has ramped up my desire to revisit some of my favorite Trek films and shows. With that being said, I just watched the Deep Space Nine documentary, What We Left Behind, and all I can say is, wow, this thing was a joy to watch. For starters, the documentary included several excellent and often emotional interviews with the cast and crew. Watching them, it quickly becomes apparent that these folks actually loved the work they were doing and were deeply invested in the portrayal of the characters they brought to life and the story they were telling. The interviews provide some eye-opening and offer an often humorous insight into the behind-the-scenes development of the series, motivation of the actors, and the interpersonal relationships between the characters. For example, I've often marveled at the nuance and complexity Mark Alamo brought to his role as Gul Dukat. Unarguably a bad guy with a Jesus complex, Dukat was given depth by his own twisted vision of himself as an unappreciated visionary hero and would-be savior. Most of the time, we're convinced that in his eyes, he's the good guy. But sprinkled throughout the series, we're also given hints that despite his best efforts, Dukat can't fully trick himself into believing his own false narrative. We're often left wondering whether or not he recognizes what a monster he is, and if, on some level, he actually revels in his own evil. As it turns out, part of this is a reflection of how Alamo viewed himself as an actor during the production. During an interview between him and the showrunner, he admits that he saw himself as a prodigy, and that he often felt resentment that his talent was unacknowledged and unappreciated. And then there's the amazing friction between Alamo's Dukat and Kira, played by Nana Visitor. Kira views Dukat with undisguised hatred and contempt. Dukat sees her attitude as an attempt to deny her subconscious respect, admiration, and thinly veiled sexual attraction towards him. As it turns out, this too seems to have been rooted in reality. In one interview, Alamo reveals that he had the hots for Nana Visitor in real life. Cued to an interview featuring Visitor, and she recounts a prank involving a fake script that had her character hooking up with Dukat. Recalling the incident, she angrily exclaims, "There is no way in hell that I would sleep with Mark Alamo." As the cast around her erupts in laughter, she quickly amends, I mean Dukat. And did you know that Avery Brooks and the showrunners wanted to portray Sisko as a bald, goateed character from day one? The producers were strongly against it, feeling that the look was too street for Star Trek, and only relented on the matter in Season 4. The documentary also includes an amazing segment in which the writers reunite for a brainstorming session, in which they map out a hypothetical opening episode for an 8th season of Deep Space Nine. Watching how easily they fall back into the world of Deep Space Nine and how fluidly they bounce ideas off one another is fascinating. With grace and style, they effortlessly craft an episode that takes place roughly 20 years after the conclusion of Season 7. The story is filled with so much heart, action, and intrigue that I was genuinely saddened by the fact that it will never come to be. Last but not least, there is a jaw-dropping remastered space battle scene that is a wonder to behold. Seeing the Defiant weaving in and out of clusters of Cardassian battleships and Klingon Vorcha-class cruisers, all crisply rendered and intricately detailed, is pure eye candy. I swear if by some miracle a remastered box set was released, I'd buy the hell out of it. I'm including a YouTube link to the footage for those who are interested. This footage was actually done by my friend Mojo, and it's really interesting. And if you haven't seen it, I'm going to put it right here in the live chat for you to watch. So let me do that. There you go. Anyway, I strongly recommend that all fans of DS9 check out the documentary. You can catch it streaming from many of the usual sites, or better yet, you can grab the truly excellent Blu-ray produced by Shout Factory. Speaking of Shout Factory, they've also produced a Blu-ray for a little film called The Hills Run Red. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's loaded with hours of special features, including original audio commentary with director Dave Parker, writer David J. Scow, and producer Robert Meyer Burnett. Thank you for taking the time to read my letter, Rob. Live long and prosper. Eric, well, thank you for that. I don't know anything about the Hills Run Red disc. I don't know what it is that you are talking about. So I don't know what that is. But anyway, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I loved what You Leave Behind. Now, obviously, as many people know, I spent 3 years of my life making documentaries for both Enterprise and Star Trek The Next Generation that appear on the Blu-ray sets of those, whether you get the individual seasons or, better yet, buy the complete series and you can see them. I liked the What You Leave Behind documentary. I thought it was very good, and like everything you said about it, really interesting. I think what it misses is, it was made by Ira Stephen Bear, who produced the show. So it's more of it's a different kind of a look than I would have brought to it. But also, what's interesting about it is because it was made by the people who made the show, it's a very unique documentary experience, and I loved it. And I recommend for those of you who like Star Trek Deep Space Nine or who just like science fiction television in general, the What You Leave Behind documentary is fascinating to watch regardless. And the Blu-ray is, in fact, terrific, and I recommend everybody pick it up. But yeah, I mean, again, watching the documentary and watching them break that fictional season 8, you think to yourself, I want to believe that everybody who works on Star Trek thinks about it in this way. Clearly they don't, but it would be nice if they did. Absolutely, though. Thanks for that letter. That's a great letter, and I very much appreciate that. Now, this letter comes from Stubble McShave. Hi, Rob. After seeing the attacks on Gina Carano for posting a famous picture of Nazis saluting with one circled guy who refused to do the salute, I recognized something about some of those accusing her. Some of these people are the same type who often, as of late, have tried to tear down and cancel each other and cancel other people who sometimes say something stupid or sometimes actually didn't say anything wrong, as in Gina Carano's case, and for those people who misconstrued what she was saying by using that picture. But you have to find out the story behind that picture to really get it. I recognized some of the type of language being used from when I went to school in my teens. They sounded like when girls were bullying other girls on the schoolyard. They didn't sound like boys bullying boys, but rather the more psychological social terrorizing that's more common amongst immature girls trying to increase their ego by tearing down others. The sad thing is that they have taken an important issue, like Black Lives Matter, and used that as a moral excuse to get a power high from tearing down other people. Fortunately, Gina Carano is a strong-willed individual who doesn't succumb to that type of pressure. I don't know her whole story, but you need a strong sense of confidence and a robust psyche to compete at an elite level in Muay Thai and MMA as she has done. When you bow down to pressure from self-appointed moral guardians who do these things in order to boost their ego, you empower them to bully other people who dare to express an unwelcome thought or who may get misunderstood. Free speech is one of our most precious things, and free speech must include the right to offend. If you don't have the right to offend, then you don't have the right to free speech, because whatever you say, someone will take offense from it, even if it's just commenting on the weather. Thanks, Stubble McShave. By the way, you should check out Christopher Hitchens' talk on free speech. He does his usual bashing of religion at the end, but if you're religious, you can still find the first half interesting and worthwhile. Here's the link. I love Christopher Hitchens, and I'm going to put this in the live chat. And here you go. Yeah, Christopher Hitchens, I miss that guy. The way he thought, I mean, obviously he was an agent provocateur, but I really did enjoy what he had to say, and I do miss him. Now, it's very interesting. There's been a lot of people lately that have been getting the cancel culture has been going after William Shatner being one as well. And what I find very interesting is about this kind of culture, this cancel culture, is how it's almost like this mob mentality. If you say something that the mob can summon and go after you, like I find that so interesting that people are putting themselves in a position of being authoritarians. I mean, it's very fascistic when you decide to go after somebody en masse who said something that you don't approve of or you don't like, or that you've not even researched and tried to figure out why they were saying what they were saying in the way that they were doing it. I think that's what I find so disappointing is there's no scholarship to cancel culture. You know, there's no dialogue to it. It's all about it's all reactionary. It's all based on me. Like, I was offended, or I can't believe I hate you because you've offended my delicate sensibilities. I mean, those kinds of people just show how weak they are and how they're not clear thinkers. And that's like, give me somebody, if somebody wants to take you down, or if I say something and, hey, I was recently a victim of this myself. If you want to take me down, that's good, but make your takedowns worth hearing. You know, really, if you want to take me down, come after me and go hard, but make sure that your takedowns are cogent and they're well-reasoned and they have context and you really know what you're talking about. For instance, just before I went on this show, I don't know why, I was part of some Star Trek thread. You know, people are talking about how, I've been fired recently from all these things and like the Schmodown. I mean, I'm like, I was never paid to do the Schmodown. I was volunteering my time, you know, and because suddenly there was one tweet that people did not like, and it was people that all knew me, and then they started calling me a trash person, which was odd because the people that were calling me that, they didn't even know me. It's not like they've been to my house, we've never had a meal together, and yet I work with them playing a character. I would hope they understood what kayfabe is and all that, but apparently not. But it's very interesting seeing how people, I think there's going to be a lot of pushback because when someone like William Shatner or can push back against this, then what can you do? And it's pretty interesting how William Shatner's been defending himself against these people, which go Bill. But yeah, I think it's strange. I don't understand the idea that there is now glee. There is so much glee. People are jumping on other people for whatever ideological grounds, and there are people that are taking glee in specifically targeting somebody that they might disagree with, but they want to destroy these people's lives. I mean, they're not just disagreeing with them on a intellectual basis. They really want to destroy someone's life. That's wacky to me. I mean, that is a malevolent kind of behavior that because you feel offended, your offense gives you justification to destroy someone else's life. I cannot tell you how pernicious this is and how it should be fought against at every turn. And yeah, I like seeing that kind of pushback. So I agree with you. This one comes from MK. Ahoy again, Sir Rob. I just stuck with the straight-up South Park Mr. Garrison ripoff for simplicity's sake this go-around. Though in my own mental McClunker, the nickname does have a few varied meanings. It was funny hearing you play off the name, though my buds always gave me stink loads for my nickname pickings. Never was my strong suit. Also, not that you're necessarily wondering, but in case you were, the reason I do the triple Z's is because I consider myself a buzzy bee. Who doesn't these days? But also, it is the main sigil for a YouTube channel I really dig called Sir Swag. Mostly commentary on current video game culture. But the channel has longer news segments about once a month as well called News Without the Bullshit, which is one of the only places I trust to find real news these days. Get that where one comes across nowadays, that's for sure. I wasn't planning on writing again so soon, but I wanted to get your thoughts on something, Sir Rob. I recently went back to a local movie theater. Bowtie Cinemas, if anyone was curious. They apparently have been slow opening since early July and are playing classics. Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, all the Harry Potter movies, through the course of the summer, Jaws, etc. Now, it's not that I have seen a re-release. It's not that I've never seen a re-release before. I was fortunate enough to have my pop take me on one of my buds to the Star Wars original re-releases when the extended versions first were coming out in the late 90s. But I'd never seen Back to the Future in theaters. And one particular word came to my mind as I was watching it, and the word is cinematic. Like many words in our vocabulary these days, I feel as though we have lost what this word really means. And though I had seen Back to the Future many, many times on TV and the small screen, when I saw it in the theater for the first time, it struck me that this movie was made for the theater. The timing, the pacing, the cut shots, particularly the chase scene where Biff and his buddies get skunked on by Marty following his improvised skateboard scene, and the iconic clock tower scene as well. This is not to say, in my own personal opinion, that movies made for the big screen first can't look great on TV, or a small projection screen later, or that all movies need to be cinematic per se, but it seems to me that what gets lost in the conversation of, or lost or diminishing theater experiences, the art of making a cinematic movie, period, if that makes any sense, i.e. in terms of pacing, music, time-ups, angle pieces, etc. I don't know, Sir Rob, I find myself rambling on and on per usual, but let me ask you directly, what does the word cinematic mean to you? P.S. There was nobody in the Back to the Future for the showing I went to, though masks were required, and going to a concession stand was like approaching the edge of a hockey rink, large plastic barriers and whatnot, in case anyone was curious about the logistics. PPS, for Lord of the Rings, it was Fellowship of the Ring, the extended version. The most shocking thing about that was I decided to sit through the credits for the full nostalgia soak, and there was no joke about 10 minutes of pure credits for the Lord of the Rings fan club, and it was kind of mind-boggling. PPS, or PSS, this is way off topic. Oh well, when somebody asked my dad what he wanted to be more than many ages past, what do you want to be when you grow up, he answered in turn and without missing a beat, Captain James T. Kirk. That's who. So you two certainly park your shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, sir. PSSST. I love everybody's letters that get read on the air. But I must say, I have a special affinity for Willow Yang's letters, especially whenever she mentions showing new movies or media to her mother. Always makes me smile when one of those comes in. Keep 'em coming, Miss Willow, and thank you, Rob and fellow Robservationists. As always, signing off now. Okay. Well, since you asked me, first of all, great letter. Thank you for writing in, and how fortuitous for you, if you're watching this episode of Robservations, that you got to hear what I would consider to be one of the most epic letters about Willow and her mother delving into the great artwork that we know as cinema. So you asked me what cinematic means to me. Well, for me, cinema was, when it was created, at first it was just images. But as it developed over the ends of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, and especially when Sergei Eisenstein started making movies, things like the battleship Potemkin, and he came up with the ideas of editing, of the 5 levels of montage. Suddenly, a new language was developing, and that was the language of cinema. Because before, if you really think about it, the ability to convey information through images and sound, but at first it was not sound, it was just imagery. You were starting to create what was a new language. I mean, make no mistake, cinema was a new language. You were actually creating meaning and metaphor through the juxtaposition of images. And that had never happened before in this medium. I mean, the idea of light shining through celluloid, and you're projecting on a screen, and you're playing with persistence of vision. I mean, movies don't really, it's a trick. I mean, film, it was a trick. You had individual still frames projected fast enough would create the illusion of movement. That's why it played on, it literally played on our senses, the persistence of vision, and it was a visual trick because it was playing on how our eyes and our minds perceive information. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, truly a brand new language. So what I consider to be cinematic is a film that uses the language of cinema to the nth degree. And again, it's a chase sequence to me can be very cinematic because you're conveying all kinds of information. Let's say you're making a scene, you're doing a car chase. When you're doing a car chase, there's a lot of things that you can do. Obviously, you are showing 2 cars, one car chasing after another. And that's one thing. You could literally do that in 2 shots if you wanted to. You could show the car that's being pursued and then the pursuer, the chasing. Well, that wouldn't be very interesting if you had just 2 shots. But what cinematic is, well, you've got the drivers as well. So once you start cutting between the cars and the drivers, you now add emotion into the scene because you can see the looks on the drivers' faces. So suddenly, you're not just conveying a car chase, you're also conveying emotion and character. And then the more you add to that in terms of shot choices, you can then create suspense. And you can cars, they're getting closer to each other, they're getting faster, the roadways are more windy. There's all of these elements that you can add to what could be a simple car chase, one car chasing another. It could be a single shot. Well, that's not very cinematic. Single shots, not just putting a camera on a car chase, that is not cinematic. What's cinematic is when you start using the language of cinema to change what could be one shot into something that is conveying all kinds of information. So not only are you getting intellectual information and story, you're finding out the way these 2 characters are reacting is telling you something about those 2 characters, but the action scene itself turns into something that's suspenseful, so you're having a visceral reaction to it, and an emotion. You're having an emotional reaction, an intellectual reaction, and literally a visceral reaction through the language of cinema, through different shot choices, and that to me is what's cinematic. And the more information and the more feelings you're engaging a human being through almost all of their senses. And that's pretty amazing. And that's what I think cinematic is. And when you bring up the chase scene through the middle of the center of the town that ends in Biff and his boys getting manure dumped on them, that scene is pure cinematic language, and it works wonderfully. It's a beautifully done sequence. And that's what going to the movies is all about. And when you're sitting in a theater and you're not, one of the things that I most regret about, as much as I like home video and watching movies at home, one of the things I most miss is that when you're sitting in a theater and the only thing that you're concentrating on is that screen. And if that's the only thing that you're concentrating on, I mean, that's an amazing thing, because how often do you get to participate in anything where you're totally focused on the story that's being told? I mean, you're literally sitting down and you are opening up your mind and your ears to hear, and your eyes and your intellect. All of it is, I love it because it's almost like you're completely open and you're taking in all of this information, And not only is it delightful, but it engages you in a way that nothing else does, because you're sitting there in this darkened theater and nothing is distracting you until you hear the reactions of your fellow mankind, and you realize that, my God, or can I say that anymore? I don't want to misgender anyone. Humankind. I said man. What do you call people? I don't know, but you know what I'm saying. I think that's what's important, and that's what pure cinematic language does. When you can focus in on it, I do think, and for me, my mind is never as open as it is when I'm watching movies, especially in a theater, because there's nothing else. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm not daydreaming. I'm literally taking everything I'm seeing in on a much deeper level, kind of when I read, too, when I'm reading, but I'm not, the visual information isn't there other than the words on the page. But I think that's how I would define cinematic, and something that is using the language of cinema. And not every movie or television show does a very good job of that. So thank you for writing in. That's what a delightful letter. So thank you for that one. Let's see. This one, who's next? Which letter am I going to read next? That is another... Wow, these are all whining about movies letters. All whining about movies. This one, Omar94. Omar94 says... you know what? I've read that Omar94 letter before. I know that there's going to be a little rocky stuff from the website. Ian Samuels is here. Ian Samuels says, Rob and fellow Robservationists, Hollywood marketing departments are bullshit merchants. I offer 2 examples. First is the incredibly successful Deadpool from 2016, a fantastically entertaining movie with Ryan Reynolds perhaps playing the part he was born to play, or at least the version of Deadpool he was meant to play. But it was marketed as the first R-rated comic book movie. Nah. Earliest is most likely 27 years previous, with 1989's version of The Punisher starring Dolph Lundgren. Then in the following year, we got Darkman. In fact, well, Darkman's a unique, it's not a comic book movie per se. It was a unique creation for cinema. In fact, there were more than 15 R-rated comic book movies, and that is not including things such as Japanese anime. My second example is 2018's Black Panther, which Marvel and Disney's bullshit merchants were pushing heavily as the first black-led superhero movie. This is so much bullshit that it is not even the first Marvel movie with a black lead. In fact, in the early 90s, Wesley Snipes wanted to make a Black Panther movie but never got it off the ground, so took on the part of Blade, which, after delays and reshoots, was finally released in 1998. Snipes was not only chosen for the part of Blade after proving his acting ability and being a martial arts expert himself, he not only starred in Blade but became a producer and was the fight choreographer for the movie. Snipes actually had similar issues to Bruce Lee, where he had to slow down his moves so that the camera could see them. Well, that's 2 examples of Hollywood bullshitters. I'm feeling rough at the moment as I have an abscess in my mouth, which is painful and draining my energies. But still, I decided to write a letter today. Ian. Well, Ian, I hope your abscess is cured. Like Alex in A Clockwork Orange, you were cured, all right. But you're absolutely true about that. You're absolutely but here's the thing. I don't necessarily. Everyone always talks about Blade, and I actually love the first Blade. I mean, the ending is a little goofy, but I love Wesley Snipes, and the whole scene, the Blood Club, when the blood starts coming out of the sprinklers and New Order's pound, that New Order remix is pounding. I love it. It's great. It's fantastic. But I think that Blade isn't seen so much as a superhero as maybe an anti-hero. Blade's a horror movie. I mean, the character Blade, I understand, Marvel Comics, Marvel Universe, I know. But I think that it wasn't necessarily, I don't think Blade is seen as a superhero movie. Certainly, Blade is a Marvel character, and Blade is going to now be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is awesome. Mahershala Ali is going to be playing Blade. I always get stuck on his name. Mahershala Ali will be playing Blade. Great casting, by the way. I love him. And, man, his turn in Luke Cage, whoo, he was so good. But I think that most people don't think of Blade as a superhero, necessarily. They see him as, a vampire. anti-hero, perhaps. But, definitely something that worth considering. Now, but you're right. I mean, again, but that's why I think they were pushing that narrative that Black Panther is the first black superhero, because Black Panther is considered a superhero created back in the mid-'60s, obviously, but in the first Marvel cinematic character. That's the only reason I would say that. And yeah, I mean, I think that the difference between the Punisher and, say, Deadpool, I mean, obviously the Punisher is going to get an R rating because the Punisher kills motherfuckers. And that's why there's a lot of violence and all that. But Deadpool, and you're going to get an R rating for that, but I think Deadpool's R rating encompasses a far wider reaching group of cultural taboos and transgressions other than just violence. I mean, it had to be rated R because, even allusions to femdom pegging for International Women's Day, stuff like that. So Deadpool ran the gamut. It was sexually explicit, it was hideously violent, it had bad language, and it also had all kinds of irreverence that kids probably should never see. So there you go. But you're right. I mean, people forget, but they're pushing things of the time, and I think when you can never hold advertisers accountable to cultural or historical accuracy. They're interested in creating hype, and that's what they do, which is fine. Eric Gant is back. He says, "Hello, Rob. I am writing in with some quick thoughts on Lower Decks. It was okay. Not excellent, but not offensive. Some of the current day terms and behaviors were a little off-putting, but not objectionable enough to make me turn it off. I also found it remarkably unfunny, considering the fact that it's being sold as a comedy. The jokes all fell flat, and they weren't as cringe-inducing as I feared they would be. Despite all of that, I was surprised to find some things I enjoyed. Of the last 3 series we've been subjected to lately, this one comes closest to feeling like Star Trek. I like that it takes place on a ship. I actually kind of like the overarching story the series seems to be setting up, and was pleasantly surprised to find that by the end of the episode, the characters had kind of grown on me. Hell, even the Blast Shields woman seemed to have more depth and backstory than I expected. I actually kind of look forward to seeing what happens with the crew next. I do not like the ship, however. I won't go into details about the crazy, nonsensical overall design elements, like requiring the crew to travel through the nacelles to get to the tiny secondary hull, or positioning of the deflector. The thing just looks ugly. Ironically, the ship's design is tenuously linked to the only genuine chuckle that the show got from me. During the opening credits, we see the ship approach a battle involving the Borg. It takes a hit to the shields and then immediately turns and flees. In that instant, a tiny chuckle escaped my lips, and I suddenly understood why the ship's name is emblazoned on the rear of the primary hull instead of the front. It's so that other ships can read it as the Cerritos runs away. This ship and her crew are far from the ideal for Starfleet. Despite this, I think there still might be some potential here. I'm not completely sold yet, but I haven't written it off either. A final thought. In a way, this series owes a lot to Discovery and Picard. If it weren't for lower expectations, Lower Decks probably wouldn't have a chance of winning me over. A good point, sir. A good point. Let's see. I'm going to jump over and see what you guys are saying in the old chat here. Let's see that. First up is Jason S. Jason S. is here, and Jason S. says, 12 score and 4 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Gettysburg. Yeah, you know what's interesting? I think what's great about a lot of what the Founding Fathers said, and I don't understand why people don't understand this, is like our Founding Fathers were existing the way people existed 250 years ago. And within that framework, yes, there was slavery. And yes, there was a lot of stuff that we wouldn't approve of now. However, they were smart enough to know all men are created equal. Whether or not when they were saying that at the time, what they meant was all men are created equal. And it's there. And it's those founding principles. Are the principles wrong? If the men who wrote those principles were deeply complex and also did things that we would find very unsavory today, does that mean that what they wrote down has to be negated when it was the actual norm of the time? I think that's wrong. I think that it isn't negated. I think there's a lot of truth in the Constitution that remains eternal. And the fact that certain people that framed our Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, whatever you're looking at, they were men of 250 years ago. But there was great wisdom that went into the future with these things, and I think they're valid today. What's not valid is the fact that, are we upholding those values the way we should be? I don't know. But yes, Jason, I agree. And we have completely forgotten how lucky we are to be living in the United States at the time where I know it seems terrible right now, but there is more equity and less racism in the United States now than almost anywhere else in the world. And even now, with all this craziness, the idea that we're suddenly living in some weird dystopian police state where everybody's at each other's throats, and we might see that on social media, but it's just not true. The United States, again, is one of the freest, most equitable countries that the world has ever seen. Do we have our problems? Certainly. Is there things that we need to change? Of course there is. But for the most part, we've fallen far from the tree, or fallen far from grace over the last 3.5 years, and there are people that have been actively working towards that. But I think we'll put it back together. We'll put it back together. Conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Yes, they are. Of course, now somebody would say, like, you're going to put gender. Look, man, when they wrote this and wrote all men are created equal, they didn't understand about all the different genders that can exist. They didn't understand about the things that we're dealing with today. That doesn't mean that one word should trip you up, because 250 years ago, that's how they talked, So, Willow is here, and Willow says, she sends in a tip and says, regarding Omar's letter yesterday, I think because LGBTQ people have in the past often been maligned and viewed as deviants and predators, they'd feel more sensitive about being negatively portrayed on screen and have those stereotypes be reinforced. Well, once again, Willow, you speak the truth. You are correct, as always. That's exactly why people objected to it, and they were correct. I mean, I think in the context of the movie like Basic Instinct, I don't think the LGBTQ community would want to claim Catherine Trammell, who trades on her sexuality both with men and women, as one of their own. She was a psychopathic killer, no matter how you look at it. And as Paul Verhoeven said, she believed that, or at least he directed her to believe, or in his belief, that she is the devil incarnate. And so she manipulates everyone. But I understand where they were coming from, and you're absolutely right. Willow goes on to say, similarly, I can understand why some Muslims may not like seeing movies with Muslim terrorists as the villains. I do agree, however, that people should watch a movie first before making a judgment. I agree with you. And, it's true. I mean, remember, like, you go back to like Lethal Weapon 2. Who are the villains in Lethal Weapon 2? The South Africans. Now you think about the South Africans? I mean, there was a long time, because of apartheid, we vilified South Africans, and they were good villains because of that crazy Afrikaner accent. And why not? At the time, I don't want to play Sun City. It was, people forget, and it's weird. Now, when it comes to Muslims, most Muslims, of course, are peaceful people. And Muslims do preach peace and all that. Of course, the Hadiths and the Quran and all that. There's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't do that, like let's kill all the infidels, and all that. But that doesn't mean. I mean, the fact is, at the time, if you look at the times we live in, there's a lot of examples of Muslim perpetrated terrorism. So then they become like the South Africans. They become the villains du jour. I'm really looking forward to the Russians now being elevated back to the villainous people that they are, and because I like when you had a good Russian villain like Hunt for Red October, man. You know, all the captains that came after Marco Ramius, all the Russians were like, those sub-captains were badasses. They were dangerous, and that's why they were great villains. So yeah, I want to see that. I want to see the Russians and the Chinese be elevated to the great villain status that they should be elevated to. So, you know, because you got to have good villain stereotypes. I mean, you know, the great thing about Hans Gruber is, at the time, for instance, leader of the West German Volksfrei movement, Hans Gruber was a great villain because he represented bad Wall Street guys. I mean, that was the best part. He was Gordon Gekko run amok. Gordon Gekko from Wall Street. If Gordon Gekko, you know, suddenly became an international thief, he would become Hans Gruber. And so at the time, a very well-dressed, slick, foreign-accented Eurotrash dude, what was better than that as a villain? But we have to remember that, you know, none of these villains should stand for an entire culture of people. They're just a subset, a small subset of people. And we have to remember that. And remember, villains, they come and go. They just depends. What's really important is that they're well-written and charismatic people. And they do really interesting things on screen. But you're right. People should watch a movie before making a judgment, and I guess it really depends where you're standing on Earth, depending on who's the villain in your movies are. Because, you know, if you go around the world and you look at who villains are, they change. Every culture has different villains and people they hate, and every culture hates somebody at some point. So you shouldn't take that stuff personally, I guess. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I thought about an alternative to the Oscars. The first was held in 1929. What about an event where they celebrate movies by voting on the best movie from each decade? The best picture from each year would be the nominee. Each movie could have a 2-minute presentation. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that could work. I mean, I just think that we have to, like all the different seasons, you gotta chalk up 2020 to a wash. So if you look in the history books 40 years from now or whatever, and people go back and look at the history of the 2020 Oscars, it was rained out. The whole season, the whole year was rained out. So, yeah. Xenomorph sends in a tip and says, don't worry, Rob, in space, no one can hear me cream. Well, Xenomorph, I think you're referring to, as everyone knows who's watched this channel for any length of time, we have had an ongoing discussion and debate as to whether or not you, as a human from planet Earth, would get busy. Would you make it with an alien? And I like this ongoing debate. And, like, how far would you go? Like, I could certainly get it on with, like, say, Mantis in Guardians of the Galaxy. Come on, hubba hubba. And maybe, you know, Jane Wyatt, Spock's mom, Amanda. There's a reason why Sarek got busy with her. So if a humanoid, I could dig, but how far would you go? Could you do a xenomorph from Alien? Could you, as a human being, could you have sexual congress with a xenomorph from Alien? Apparently the alien can, because the alien's telling us right here, the alien said, in space no one can hear me cream. Well, that's good. I'm glad that you as a xenomorph know how to speak English too. So at least if we don't get together at night, I can go out and have drinks with you and we can carry on a cogent conversation, which could be fun. Jamie Cruz is here and says, may I suggest for Romantic Friday, Waking the Dead with Billy Crudup and Jennifer Connelly. 2 actors I like. I've never seen Waking the Dead. Maybe I should watch that. That sounds good. I don't know. I would have to check with the ace, the arbiter of cinematic excellence, and the enchantress of entertainment, Elizabeth Gwendolyn Bell, and give her final approval. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, so a lot of the movies of 2020 are being moved to 2021, but which movie that originally was supposed to open in 2021 are you looking forward to the most? Which movie that was supposed to open in 2021? Oh my God, I mean, I haven't even thought about which movies are opening in 2021. That was originally, well, you know what? Let me do a cursory exploratory, let's see, movies of 2021. I don't want to forget anything. So I can tell you which movies, the list of American films of 2021. Let's see. As I look, Well, Eternals has been moved in, but that doesn't count. So far, all these movies that I'm looking at, I haven't seen one that I've been waiting for that was originally going out to be in 20... Oh, Shang-Chi, only because I've loved Shang-Chi. I've always loved Shang-Chi, the Paul Gulacy, Doug Metch run of Shang-Chi. Micronauts is listed. I mean, I've wanted to see a Micronauts movie for how long? But I guess that was a movie that was originally 2021. The Tomorrow War, the Chris McKay movie with Chris Pratt, the horror, the science fiction movie. I want to see that. And that was always supposed to come out. The Batman, I guess, that was a 2021 movie. Mission Impossible 7, that was a 2021 movie. So, yeah, but I mean, that's about it. That's about it, I think. But those are the movies that just as I'm looking here would be the ones that I would say that I was looking forward to. Factual Opinion is here. When is DS9 supposed to be amazing, Rob? Because I'm almost done with season 5 and it's still just good. My expectations were way too high, and I have to say it's overrated. Huh. Well, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what your expectations were. I'm a huge DS9 fan, and I started really liking Deep Space Nine actually in season 2. Season 3 I thought was half great, and then by the time you get to season 4, I really enjoyed it. I mean, it might not be your cup of tea. You know, if you're just watching it now, remember, I mean, one of the things that I find interesting is these things that have been elevated to classic status, that you go back and people are, oh my God, that movie's a classic, that movie's so good. Most of the time, you can understand why they're classics. Because remember, when movies astonish at the time they come out, no one has ever seen anything like that. But once they come out, then you have imitators, you have things that are like those things. And so pop culture then changes. The needle is moved. Like once Jaws comes out, look, I still think Jaws is a terrific film. But I know that there's a lot of people that maybe can't get over the shark or the pacing or whatever. I watch Jaws and I'm entranced by it because I saw it when it first came out. And I think a lot of the time there's so much hype to these things, especially, you know, when I was a kid, what was really interesting, to me at least, was that there were things that were held in high regard, like Casablanca or something, you know, and I would hear about things that were great, but there wasn't so much hype around them. They were acknowledged as being classics of the genre, but it wasn't pounded home at you that these things were so great, and you didn't have people like nowadays. What's really interesting is if you're a Star Trek fan or a science fiction fan and you've now seen serialized storytelling, like for instance Modern Battlestar Galactica. Modern Battlestar Galactica is an amazing show. But if you already have Modern Battlestar Galactica and that's what you watch and that's your touchstone, if you're going to go back further and you're going to watch shows like Babylon 5 or Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and you've heard of their reputation, you're used to a more, I don't know, fuel-injected, for lack of a better term, entertainment. So when you go back and you watch these characters, like on Deep Space Nine, there's a number of factors. I mean, I would say that one of the factors trying to watch Deep Space Nine now, it's not in high def. So if you go back and you try and watch Deep Space Nine, the very look of the show, the resolution of the show is something that you might even not even realize it, but it's psychologically off-putting because it's missing its sheen. Now, that's not to say that the storytelling, I mean, certainly the storytelling in the first season of Deep Space Nine is very monotone, for lack of a better term. It's very monotone. And I can understand that. It's not just your cup of tea, but, you know, it's a good question to ask. And there's no reason you can think it's overrated. So there you go. Brendan Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, Rob, you need to watch The Neon Demon in the right arena at 3 a.m. after a night out drinking and you remember where you hit that joint. Then it'll jive with you. Brendan, I mean, it's a model. It's a movie about models. I mean, what I need is I need like 10 fatty rails, and I can just hoover up with a crisp $100 bill. Then I think I'd be putting the nice, the mindset of Neon Demon. But I like that. I think you might be right. A Factual Opinion goes on and says, what I like about DS9 is the setting, the darker gray episodes TNG wouldn't do. The Dominion, the light serialization, Bashir and O'Brien, space battles, and I'm a sucker for Mirror Universe episodes. Yeah, I mean, I think you might be surprised. Look, man, I'll tell you flat out, I think Season 6 of Deep Space Nine is the single best season of modern Star Trek. Season 6. All across the board. So there you go. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, so Rob, I'm going to ask you to flex muscle and make the first box office prediction in months. Since it finally looks like theaters will open in most of the U.S. for real next weekend, how does the first weekend go, and how does contender number 1 Unhinged do? Ooh, Nick. Okay. There's less than 20% of the movie theaters open in the United States. So, and even then, those theaters can only be filled to 50% capacity. So that is a severely diminished box office. I would think that if Unhinged comes out or New Mutants, I would say that anything between 2 million and 4 million would be an epic win. 2 million and 4 million. That's my prediction. Calvin Bowes is here, sends in a tip and says, for the cancel culture, look at the Constitution. It grants everyone freedom of speech, but no place does it grant you freedom of not being offended. Oh, I agree. I mean, look, I think one of the things about cancel culture is it's incredibly selfish. You know, it's the people that are offended. Like, I don't understand that if you're offended, if somebody says something that you don't like, that you get to go into battle mode and go after them and cancel them. I don't understand that. I mean, I thought that the very basis of our constitutional republic is that we have debate. We have rigorous, thoughtful, cogent, intellectual debate. We haven't done that. I mean, I see that people talk about it in academia, but there has been a let's call it a, I don't know, it's I just don't think that we have the kind of rigorous intellectual debate anymore. When I went to college, I went to the Evergreen State College before I transferred to USC. And at the Evergreen State College, if you read about what happened there in 2017, that shit never would have flew. This idea that college students know more than their faculty, it's crazy to me. It's bizarre to me that students want to have safe spaces from ideas and words. That I've watched a lot of YouTube videos. I watch a lot of the intellectual dark web, and the idea that people want to equate speech to violence is strange to me. Violence is violence. If you're going to be accosted, have bodily harm, that's violence. But people talking, look, people might want to say offensive things to get a rise out of you, but it's not like being punched in the face. I mean, anybody who says it is drives me crazy. I have been mugged. I was mugged in Australia by 4 guys. They went all Clockwork Orange on my ass. They kicked I was left with 3 cracked ribs and a broken nose and a nice cut above my face. My nose is eternally different after that night. That's violence. That's violence. And it was not fun. And it was painful for weeks after. So when someone equates speech to violence, it incites me to violence, and I want to punch them in the face and break their nose and say, was that like hearing an offensive piece of speech? Is that the same? Because if you've had violence perpetrated against your person and you listen to people talk about how speech is violence, it's not the same. And I'll tell you, I don't wish anybody to suffer at the hands of another person physically. I think physically imposing yourself on a person or anybody who's any kind of assault, whether you've been beaten up, whether you've been raped, it's the worst thing that can happen. It's the worst thing that can happen because it's like a Cronenberg horror film. It's like body horror. You know, like in The Fly, when your own body revolts against you. And unfortunately, a lot of us feel that because we are going to die of cancer or of heart disease or whatever. Our own bodies are going to be the demise of our soul and our spirit. So having physical harm done to you is the worst thing that can happen because you can't run from it. And your intellect is trapped in this vessel that is causing you tremendous pain, and it's horrible. And let me tell you something. It has nothing to. It is. If you want to talk about speech being violent, fuck you. It's not. And so the idea that people somehow are unable to process intellectual ideas is a weakness, and I think it needs to go away in this country. The whole point of this show, for instance, is to listen to people. Every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. Now there's people that if you tell them your story and they object to what you say, or if you use the wrong word or the wrong pronoun or something, they'll come after you. I think that's weak. And I think that we've allowed this infestation in our society, and it's wrong. Julius Goodwin is here. Hello, Julius. One of two. As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it, all men are created equal except Negroes. When the know-nothings get control, it will read, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners. Yeah, it was really interesting. I watched a video yesterday from... it was from the 60s. It was going around on Facebook, and it was talking about how Marxism and communism will use racial divides in this country. It was completely timely and completely topical. I mean, I find it amazing to me when someone from the Black Lives Movement, a leader in a leadership position, talks about Marxism, and I'm like, what? I mean, anybody who's studied Marxism, I don't understand. And I hear lots of young people talk about Marxism. I'm like, you need to go back and read the history of the 20th century because it didn't end well for a lot of people. Marxism was literally the death of tens of millions of people. So, yeah, Marxism, it's crazy. I am not a fan of that. I don't understand. But like you said, it's one of two, Julius. Okay. It will read, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I should prefer immigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. To Russia, for instance, where, this is a quote, pardon me. I know this quote. Let me read this as I didn't recognize it. Now let me read this in its entirety. As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it as all men are created equal except Negroes. When the know-nothings get control, it will read all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I should prefer immigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. To Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure and without the base alloy of hypocrisy. Abraham Lincoln. Yes, you're absolutely right. Abraham Lincoln was a wise man. And remember, he was also a Republican. What happened to that? Stubble McShave says, he sends in a super chat and says, so Rob, could you do it with E.T.? Well, as a straight man, I don't know if I could get it on with E.T. himself. But maybe a female of the species. I mean, it might be interesting engaging in sexual congress with an intelligent extraterrestrial from a planet that... I mean, here's the thing. It would be interesting. I mean, the thing about... We laugh. We still have this very puritanical aspect about sexuality. But really, if you're engaging if you're having sex with somebody for pleasure, not for procreation, what you're trying to do is you're sharing with somebody the physical sensations of getting close with another person, but your creativity and your imagination are engaged. Because think about it. I mean, if there was no imaginative part of sexuality, it would be probably pretty silly. I mean, basically what you're trying to do is get each other off or whatever. This is just repetitive mechanical behavior. But, when we see, if we find whatever we find attractive, whether it's the opposite sex, whether it's the same sex, you're engaging your beauty, your sense of beauty, and you're engaging the creativity of you're in your own head, but what it's like for somebody else to touch you and what they're doing to you, and it turns them on. I mean, there's a whole category of those things that's happening. So I would say that if you came up with somebody if you were, it would be interesting to know what sexuality is, not procreation, but what sexuality is for an alien race that's intelligent, that has those same qualities, that brings an imaginative aspect, that has a sense of beauty, or if you're turned on visually by something. I would be curious to explore, like, what turns an ET on? Like, if you're hooking up with an ET, a female ET, like, does she have a clitoris? Like, can you go down on her? And does a 45-degree upturn tip of the tongue going from, say, 60 to 120 beats per minute, does that work? I mean, if you're a cunning linguist, that would be interesting. Or does she not have that? I mean, who knows? You just never know. What would it be like? I would be curious. And so, yeah, I could get it on with ET, female ET. Sure. I'd be curious to see what that was like. Especially if you find a scientist who's interested in, it's like that episode in Next Generation that BB Newirth is in, First Contact, when she says, I've always wanted to make it with or whatever she says, always wanted to sleep or have sex with an alien. And Riker's like, oh, okay. Because, like, wouldn't it be interesting? That would be, I mean, talk about, like, here's what I would do, for instance, on, like, is there a sex officer, or is there, like, on the Cerritos in Lower Decks? Like, if you're on a second contact mission and you're doing cultural exchange, wouldn't procreation and sexuality be a huge part of that cultural exchange? Because if you guys are, if you're bringing in a state into the Federation, or you're bringing in, if it's just second contact and they're not yet a Federation member, but you're allowing somebody entry into the larger global and universal community, you would have to have a healthy understanding of their procreation, their sexuality. So, because that would inform a lot about their culture. So, would you have a biology cultural attaché liaison or something? See, to me, that's an episode of Lower Decks. There's if I had made Lower Decks and you're dealing with, they've said, oh, it's the ship. See, what I find to be problematic about Lower Decks is they've told you that the Cerritos is somehow of lesser importance and the people on it are inept, which I think is stupid. Like, there's no Starfleet ships that are inept, and the people that are going into a second contact, when you're opening relations with another culture, that would be one of the most important jobs in Starfleet. And the idea of being on Lower Decks and, keeping the idea that people on the Lower Decks are somehow less important than the command staff is ridiculous. When you're in space on a starship, everybody's important. Everybody has a job to do that's important. There's nobody on a starship that is non-essential personnel. Everybody has a job to keep the ship running. And if they're not there, then the ship isn't going to run. This idea that just because we follow the command staff, I think the whole idea of Lower Decks is not very smart. It's in the Star Trek universe, I think it's kind of dumb. But I think, like, wouldn't it be interesting if they had, like, you do a whole episode, like, what happens when you're trying to understand, maybe they'll do that. Who knows? Maybe they'll do that. I don't know, but you never know. Jason S. sends in a tip and says, the term men or man has multiple uses like sex. It's also used as short for human and mankind. Yes, but you know as well as I do, Jason, in this day and age, that's genderist. Just like the use of man in Star Trek, the original series opening. I know. Look, I'm with you. But now people would, people want to change things. You and I know that. But that's just because we grew up when we grew up. Stubble McShave says, you missed one of my tips. Did I? Did I go back and maybe I did. I did miss. Oh, Johnny Stewart. I missed Johnny Stewart. I did miss these. How did I miss these? Wow, I've missed a couple. I missed 3. Calvin Bose says, tips Buck and says, Braxton loved Lower Decks and says it was better than Discovery or Picard. I personally did not like it, but I see the appeal to kids. Well, don't burst Braxton's bubble. You know, let Braxton like what he likes, obviously. But he's a smart kid. Johnny Stewart. Now, Johnny Stewart is a producer that I work with on I read a letter from him the other day. He's here in the chat. He sends in a super chat and says, can you riff about the Warner Brothers layoff scenario? Thanks. Oh, man. Well, for those of you who are not, or if you haven't kept track, they laid off about 800 people at Warner Brothers yesterday. All kinds of shakeups all across the studio. I mean, basically, the head of home video, who'd been there for a long time, gone. Everybody at DC Universe pretty much gone. A lot of executive shakeups across the board, and also just a lot of people lost their jobs. And it's inevitable with the AT&T takeover. It's too bad. DC Comics, Bob Harris, the longtime editor-in-chief of DC Comics, gone. And when I read stuff like this, I always wonder, well, are they gonna be replaced, or are they just streamlining the whole company? We all knew that DC Universe was gonna go away and that it was gonna be absorbed into HBO Max. I mean, now DC Universe, there's nobody left working there. I hate to see that the home video divisions, this has happened across the board, the home video divisions of the studios are being folded into theatrical or something else. I mean, that happened at Sony. Warner Brothers, my beloved Warner Archives. I don't know if there were cuts there, but I love Warner Archives. I mean, they're putting out older movies and older catalog titles. And by the way, as I've said on the show many times, the bit rates of Warner Archives discs are way higher than the standard Warner Home Video releases, and that's something you cannot shake a stick at, because having higher bit rates, that's what physical media is all about. So it's the way of the world, you know. The corporate entities taking over. See, my big problem with the corporatization of the world is the lack of knowledge that veterans have. Like, if someone's been at their job for 30 years and they don't just know their job, but they also know the history. Like, if you've been at a job for 30 years, say, in terms of home video, you've seen all kinds of trends grow and change. You've seen the introduction of new formats, whether it was Laserdisc, DVD, Blu-ray, now 4K. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that gets lost. And I think that actually, without that institutional knowledge being passed down to, say, someone else, you're really losing. I think the idea that corporations, through these shakeups, lose institutional knowledge of the very places that they've purchased is dangerous, and it doesn't serve anyone well. I think transitions like this should take a lot longer. I think you don't just announce, okay, these are where the cuts are. You need to pass the torch, because the newer generations, they're going to not have the knowledge. I mean, I've seen it. Look, I've definitely seen it in post-production in home video. There's a lot of people that just, if you didn't come up knowing what time code was and working with SMPTE bars and understanding, like, if you're delivering materials to Germany, why things get rejected from QC, because they don't know. And I think the worst thing about these cuts is the loss of institutional knowledge, and it's kind of a bummer. But I hope Warner Brothers bounces back. I really do. I really hope so. But I think it's rough, man. My heart goes out to everybody that worked at Warner Brothers. My heart goes out to everybody that works at DC Comics. And again, when you do something like this, I've never seen like a company say, okay, here's our new mandate. Like, here's where DC Comics is going to be. Here's our vision for where it's going to be. Maybe they have that. I don't know. They haven't reported on that. But they're like, okay, we see DC Comics is going to be like this. And I think that what is also unfortunate is that people don't necessarily see this coming, and then the people that remain are like, well, now what do we do? Does AT&T or whatever have a vision for DC Comics? Obviously, HBO Max launched in a very haphazard way. A lot of people were not happy with how HBO Max launched, and that was not good. And so how are we going to move forward? People need to understand, especially when you're working in a corporate environment, you want to believe that your corporation knows what it's doing. And I think a lot of the time this sows a lot of weird insecurities, and the new people that come in are trying to plant their flag, and I think it's disruptive. But then again, I've never had to be in a position where I either dealt with this, or I was actually downsized once. When I worked at NBC, one day I walked into work, and I'd been there for a year. I was a predator. I was producing and editing promo spots, and sometimes writing them, creating them, and doing everything. And I did it for a year. We did over 100 spots for the Olympic Games, the Sydney Olympic Games, when MSNBC, CNBC, and NBC were doing they called it the Complete Olympics. It was spread out over the internet and all their different places. I did over 100 spots, and then I was moved upstairs, and I got to work on the primetime launch campaign, where I was creating materials for the 2000 and 2001 primetime launch campaign starting in August. And that's when I did the voice of the XFL cheerleaders. I did a ton of stuff, and I was there for almost a year. And one day I walked into work, and they said, NBC today cut 10% of their workforce, and you're the only one in the department that doesn't have a contract, so we're letting you go. I had no warning, no idea, and I was gone. And that could have been handled better. They knew they were going to cut 10% of the workforce. I could have been at least given a couple of weeks' notice when someone says, hey, I was getting married in a month and a half, and I had moved into a much more expensive apartment that I expected to be able to pay for. And suddenly I literally went from 60 to 0 in 1 second. So that was rough. That was rough. So, my heart goes out to those people, man. And let's see where Warner Brothers is going to wind up. I don't know. So Stubble, I'm sorry I missed one of your tips. Asante sends in a super chat and says, my former screen name is Neo Maxi Zoom Dweeby. What is that from? Campy, I couldn't figure it out. Hang on. I know what that's from. Neo Maxi Zoom Dweeby. It's not. Oh God. It's not Real Genius. Is it Breakfast Club? That's what That's the thing that comes to mind. It might not be, but that I would go with that. Neo Maxi Zoom Dweeby. That's pops into my head. So I might be wrong. Jason Whitcomb sends in a tip. I don't know if that's right. It's on the tip of my tongue. I see it. It's coalescing. Jason Whitcomb says, Rob, people brag about having physical media and they're safe because they can watch whenever. But what if their Blu-ray player or device breaks down and nobody knows how to fix it because things are digital now? What then? Well, we're fucked. We are. Unfortunately, that's how it would be. And you gotta, I wanted to buy a backup. I need to get a backup 4K or Blu-ray player, and I do. I definitely do. And I think that's definitely something to consider. It absolutely is something to consider. So, yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to go to work. I have to go to a sound spotting session today for the unannounced show that I've been working on for Netflix. And I have to go. I've got to go join a Zoom call and go to a virtual sound spotting session. So, yeah, by the way, for those who might be interested, I watched the very first finished episode of our show. It's done. Episode 1, in the can, completely finished. It was very exciting to watch it with final color and final sound, and it looks terrific. Very proud of the work that I've done. I've worked on 15 episodes of the show so far. I would imagine we will be doing episode 16 shortly, and I am now going to spot episode 5. So I want to thank you for all of your support. I'm bringing an end to episode number 487 of Robservations. You know, someone called me that I'm mostly a YouTuber these days. Well, I do that, but now I'm going to a sound spotting session for the 5th episode of the upcoming Netflix show that I've been working on for the last year, and I think Well, it won't be announced. I don't know when it's going to come out, but sometime in the quarter, number 4 of it's 8 episodes. First season's 8 episodes. So anyway, got to go do that. So I'm bringing an end to this show. I will see you back on the John Campea show tomorrow. I will obviously be here tomorrow on Robservations, the show about something. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Joshua Levesque. I want to thank the Richard. I want to thank Robert Pariso. I don't know if anyone else is here. I think that's what I got, y'all. I want to thank Mike Bodden. Go check out. He's been working diligently on the website, theburnettwork.net. Send me letters there, rmb@theburnettwork.net. Send me videos, whatever. Our favorite German son, Dieter Bastian, short film, along with his director, Patrick Keller, dropped on the Burnettwork YouTube's page, and I think it's got like 1,500 views so far. So go check it out and tell Dieter how much you love him. And thank you for all supporting the channel through your generous tips and super chats and all of that. It is much appreciated. But please, it's also appreciated when you write me letters. I love that. And I want to give a special shout out to Willow's mom for watching Arrival and E.T. Good on her. And maybe on my 500th show, I can get Willow and her mom to come on together and go live. Because wouldn't you all want to see that? I mean, we should actually. It would be great if we could pick a movie for them to watch as mother-daughter and have them come on to the 500th show and give us a review. The Willow Yang and her mother review. I mean, that should be a segment on this channel. I think that when I read Willow's letters, it would be great to get them both on camera so we could hear these riffs live. Come on, Willow. Can we make this happen? What do I have to do? But anyway, thanks very much, everyone. And remember, as I have my people are like, am I a gun advocate? No, I'm a laser gun advocate. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you imagination connoisseurs, have a better day.